Welcome once again to the Icons. I'm the sports professor, Rick Horrow. Each month we sit down with an influential figure in the world of sports. This month, an individual who's had a huge effect on the business of college football for decades, American Athletic Conference Commissioner Mike Aresco. Let's get started by going inside the Icon. Mike Aresco graduated from Tufts University in Massachusetts. After getting his law degree at UConn, Aresco practiced law privately in Hartford for several years. He joined ESPN in 1984 as counsel and moved into their programming department in 1988. Aresco then moved to CBS Sports, where he was executive vice president of programming. In that position, he was responsible for all college sports programming for CBS Sports and CBS Sports Network. He played an integral role in CBS Turner's partnership for the NCAA men's basketball tournament and the historic 15-year agreement between CBS and the SEC. Aresco was named Commissioner of the Big East, now the American Athletic Conference, in August of 2012. With Aresco at the helm, the American teams have won 4 NCAA championships, had a college football playoff semifinalist, 3 New Year's 6 bowl game champions, and 2 NCAA men's Final Four participants. He also played an active role in the formation of the college football playoff, serving on the group that picked the members of the playoff selection committee. To start, I don't know if there's anybody else that's had the kind of TV background that you had that became a conference commissioner. I know there were certain ones that we could distinguish, but you started with ESPN and you started on the council side, and in I guess '88 you were assistant general counsel at ESPN, so you understood all the legal issues, and your UConn law training certainly advanced your ability to move forward on that. How do you think your television experience, ESPN and CBS, prepared you for what you're doing now?
Well, it's interesting, Rick. I think I was probably the first non-traditional hire that any of the conferences had done. Pretty much everybody else came from college athletics. I think it's been a useful background. I think in the end, I came into this knowing almost everyone in college sports because I dealt with them for so many years, and I had talked to them as insiders. I used to spend week, when I visited Chicago, Jim Delaney would always ask me to stay at his home. Same thing with Mike Slive and Birmingham. So I got to know everybody really well, and bringing the legal background is always valuable. You're a lawyer, and you obviously have a wonderful background, Harvard Law School, and that you're not snowed when you have a legal background when it comes to a lot of these key issues. You're confident that you can deal with them, and that's always been, I think, of some value in this kind of position. And then the TV experience. We're a media-driven world, Rick, and a lot of it was that I had to deal with the media when I worked in TV. It isn't so much the TV programming experience as much as it was, being in the public eye and understanding how important that is and how important it is to promote the conference. So I think in that sense, it had an indirect benefit. And then as far as the TV itself, I'm on the strategic TV committee for the CFP, and I think, I have some definite ideas on how we should structure the next deal, and I think my TV background will have some value for the college sports environment. The community. I hope so.
Well, I hope so. We'll talk about that at the back end of this, and they better listen to you. That's all I got to say. And by the way, the other thing too is a deal maker. Do you think your legal training and your legal credentials made it easier for you to make deals, or harder because people would assume a lawyer's always got something up his sleeve?
No, I tried to hide the fact that I'd been a lawyer, as you know. The old saying, recovering lawyer,
Yeah, no, I get it.
No, and I wasn't even planning to go to law school. I went to the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy after undergrad, and I saw an ad I was working in Connecticut trying to earn some money after spending so much money in college and grad school. And I saw an ad, without digressing too much, I saw an ad for a night session at the University of Connecticut. It was at $300 a semester. And I thought, well, it wouldn't hurt to have a legal background. I didn't necessarily want to practice law, but I did that for a year, and we had a really fascinating group of people. We had a woman who graduated first in her class at Wellesley and had become basically a housewife, and then finally went back to law school. We had a fellow who's an airline pilot who was doing it because he had a lot of time off. And it was a fascinating mix. But having that background, I eventually went to the day division and then worked in the U.S. Attorney's Office as an intern for an entire year. That kind of experience was absolutely invaluable in programming. Every deal has to be ultimately, as they say, papered. That's the term they all use, and knowing, and I learned a lot working at ESPN from Andy Brilliant, who had been at HBO, and their forms were outstanding. The way they did things. I was the one who wrote the board items for ABC for ESPN. For the ABC board, and that was another valuable experience. But again, having had the legal background helped me to be able to do those things. And yeah, Rick, it's really critical. The other thing is when you do deals, you have to make decisions. And we had programmers at ESPN in the early days who just couldn't do the deal. They couldn't ultimately lock it down. They just had misgivings and they lacked confidence. I ultimately had to test myself. I did a few deals early on and said, I can do this. And in the commissioner's position, you're making decisions constantly. Rick, in any leadership position, you have to be a leader. You have to want to be a leader, and you have to make decisions. And I think having a legal background is extremely useful, and it's served me well, even though I wasn't necessarily planning to be a lawyer. It was a startup that we had no TV deal. Didn't know it would survive. We actually didn't survive. We thrived eventually, but it took some time and effort.
Is it harder today than it was in 2012 when you accepted the job when it was the old Big East?
Yes and no. I think it's less enjoyable right now because we've got so many challenges that I think are changing college sports, and not always for the better. And that doesn't mean I don't favor NIL. But NIL, as you know, has become essentially a way to recruit and retain players. It's basically the joke now is NIL means now it's legal, And,
I hadn't heard that one. That was good. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what. But no, when I joined, though, we were in a period of turmoil, as you know, and I don't know that I had a tougher period than the 6 months between the time Jim Delaney took Rutgers in Maryland. We also lost Louisville to the time when we finally reestablished the American. The Big East basketball members left, as you know, at the time. Realignment was, frankly, the environment was very unstable, and we did lose some more teams. And just, basically we were given up for dead by the media. Resurrecting the conference as the American. We didn't have a name. We didn't have a logo. We had nothing. And it was essentially, it was a startup. We had no TV deal. Didn't know it would survive. We actually didn't survive. We thrived eventually, but it took some time and effort. And things had to fall our way a bit. But in the end, that period was really tough. What's going on now? I mean, we're an established conference. Yes, we are going to lose some schools, Rick, as you know, and they're good schools. They're schools that have done well in our league, and we've done well for them. And that's going to make it a little difficult. We brought in 6 new schools. Some are works in progress in terms of their football programs, which, as you know, football drives everything in this business. So that's going to be really important to see how they develop. But now you have more. I think what you didn't have back 10 years ago that you have now are all these other ancillary issues that are large issues because they involve college sports, whether it's NIL, whether it's pay to play coming down the road, and how are we going to deal with that? Whether it's these collectives and what are we going to do there? It's the enforcement function and whether that needs to be completely, reordered, which it probably does. There's also a gender equity issue that didn't exist then. I think we've seen that there's some real issues there. And rulemaking devolving to the conferences, that's not something we've had before, and we're going to have to face that when this transformation committee that you've read about doesn't work. I'm sure a lot of the decisions will be left to the conferences. We're better off financially than we were, so we have resources that we didn't have 10 years ago. But the landscape has changed, and I just think at times it doesn't feel. You saw what just happened with UCLA and USC. I mean, that's an earthquake. Okay, Texas and Oklahoma was also, but those are contiguous states. Those are schools that have a lot in common with the SEC schools. But the geography, everything about the history of and tradition of the Pac-12, you knew that something like that could happen, but you didn't expect it. and that's really shaken things up because now you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know whether one of these conferences could even disappear. Uh, and there's a lot of I try not to take this personally. You really can't, and some
Yeah.
of my colleagues do sometimes take it personally. I don't think you'll find me making statements about it being betrayed or anything like that, because that's not what happens here. These are voluntary organizations. If you pay your exit fee, you can leave, and so consequently, you can't take it personally. On the other hand, we're all human, and it's like the old Godfather. It's only business, but the truth is, it's not fun to be going through this, and I don't think it's over.
No.
These tend to play out over a couple of years. I think we probably should have gone after California when they passed their first NIL law, because in the end, now you have a patchwork across the country, which is an absolute mess.
13-14 was instructive because when you talk about the success of the league, of the conference, you talk about the BCS win, men's Final Four, women's Final Four, and College World Series. But you also talk about being ranked national top 10 in football, men's basketball, women's basketball, men's soccer, baseball, and men's golf. What that tells me is you're all about inclusion. Again, you're not puffing, but you are everybody's commissioner in all sports. That meant a lot to me, I guess, when I'm reading that.
Well, no question. I mean, I think we wanted to be a balanced conference. The other thing is, it's not just the number of sports where we've been successful. It's the fact that we've had numerous teams that have done it. It's not just a one horse league. We've had a number of football teams that have been successful. We've had several basketball teams that have done well. And again, UConn left the conference, but they did win a national championship in men's basketball in our conference, and they won 3 women's titles in our conference. Went to the Final Four pretty much every year. Now Cincinnati, they'll be leaving, but we'll always be proud that the legacy is that they won a playoff berth in our conference. The other thing, Rick, is as we look at what's happened to college sports, we're in a new world now. So we succeeded because I think our guys were very intelligent about the way they recruited, about the way they spent their money, about the way they hired coaches. The problem now is with NIL and the portal, the transfer portal, you have a perfect storm. And you're not sure if you're going to be able to keep your best players. You're not sure whether the NIL thing is going to have a real impact on your programs. I think we're going to be okay because I think we can recruit high school players who are going to be ignored by a lot of the programs that are going to the transfer portal more and more, almost exclusively sometimes. So I think and we also are in the right states where players we don't get the first time around want to come home. They want to come back. And we're in Texas. Obviously, we have 4 teams in Texas going forward. We're in Alabama. We're in Florida. We're in Pennsylvania. We're in Oklahoma. We're in hotbeds of college football. And make no mistake, I value college basketball. I love the sport. Grew up rooting for UConn in Connecticut. But college football drives everything, Rick. You know that. And we all have to be conscious of that. And that's how we basically decided on our expansion recently.
Well, all right. Let me ask you this relative to the NIL and transfer portal grouping. It's maybe a hard question, and I'm going to stay 30,000 feet. I'm not going to ask you to complain or evaluate anybody's work. But when the head of the NCAA sends a signal 2 years ago that, all right, it's a good idea, let's pay college athletes, and we will come up with a structure that everybody will love by July 1 in a year and a half. So don't worry. And then July 1, everybody's out of town. Missed opportunity? Find the right words to describe how you felt when the void and the vacuum felt to you and every other conference commissioner.
Well, I have to tell you, we didn't show a lot of leadership as a group. And I testified at the trial in Oakland in front of Judge Wilkin regarding the educational benefits, and I thought in the end we came out of that okay. I mean, we really did. It wasn't that bad. She capped some things, but she also was, I think, relatively conservative in her judgment. And we appealed that decision. I think it was a real mistake to do that, and we ended up getting clobbered in the Supreme Court on the antitrust issue. And then we became paralyzed, as you know. Everything was, well, we were afraid of an antitrust lawsuit. Well, frankly, we're going to get sued pretty much every time we do something, unless we can get it some kind of exemption. And I'm not sure, we can. But the point is, if you know, Rick, you're a lawyer. If you put forth sensible rules, reasonable rules, you can withstand those challenges. And you have to take a position in the end. You have to show that you're for something. And we didn't do that. I think we probably should have gone after California when they passed their first NIL law, because in the end, now you have a patchwork across the country, which is an absolute mess. Every state has a different rule.
Yeah.
In the Supreme Court, a lot of it was dicta. I think the worst thing was for us was Judge Kavanaugh saying basically, you guys are always violating the.
Dicta is, for people that don't understand, dicta is something that really kind of doesn't mean anything, but people read it as gospel. But
it frightened us to death, and unfortunately we have we've gotten to the point now. Remember too. The transfer portal, the key there is the year in residency, Rick. It doesn't exist anymore. That is what I think kept rosters, kept stability in rosters. And you really had to think a lot if you were a student athlete and you were going to transfer and sit out a year. You really wanted to go someplace else. Now it's a question of I can go anytime I want. Some guys have transferred 3 different times because they haven't hit the deadline yet. And then the NCAA was toying with the idea. It hasn't happened yet, and I'm not sure it will happen, with unlimited transfers. And the idea was that on an ad hoc basis, their academic issues would prevent them from transferring as much as they might want. To me, that's got it backwards, because all that would mean is lawyers getting involved and showing how you'd be fighting over the academic progress somebody's making. But the interesting thing is, in what universe is that a good idea? In what world is unlimited transfers a good idea for anybody? Some people believe that, we got to pay players. Others say no. Others say, look, it's going to be club sports eventually. It's going to be, you'll use the logo of the school, but it'll be loosely tethered to education. The players may not even, for the most part, go to school. As far as I'm concerned, what's the point?
So on July 29, you gave a speech, quote, fearing the trajectory of college football. It's picked up in a lot of places. What specifically did you mean, or just collectively all the stuff we're talking about now?
Well, Rick, my point was consolidation is here to stay.
Yeah.
And we can't, it's spilled milk. We can't cry over it. It's there. We have to deal with the 75% of college football, for example, that will not be in the Big Ten and the SEC, and keep that neighborhood healthy. Jim Delaney and I talk from time to time. Jim's, as you know, an old friend. And our position is pretty much the same. If you live in a city, you don't want one neighborhood to be healthy and then the other, or two neighborhoods to be healthy and the other 8 not to be. And in this particular instance, I think the key to everything right now, literally the key to everything, is the CFP, the College Football Playoff. We obviously got the new platform in place, a new format, and the key was access. You have to have access. If conferences and schools and teams have access, as long as there's hope, their donors will be involved. Their fans will be involved. They'll be able to recruit. They may not be able to get the great players that maybe the SEC or the Big Ten are able to get. But the point is, we have to recognize that everything's been moving toward this consolidation for quite some time. And the other thing, with respect to where we are now, we have to understand that pay for play is probably coming, and can we nationalize it somehow? Can we avoid having a union? We don't need 5,000 dues paying employees. Can we avoid employee status? But can we work maybe with Congress? And I know Senator Tuberville and Senator Manchin have asked for NIL ideas. We sent our letter in. But the point is, can we have some kind of collective action where we figure out a way to compensate the players? Look, it's true that they go through a lot more now than they did. You have longer seasons, you've got a lot of stress. I looked at it akin to graduate school students who actually teach classes, right? And they are compensated to some degree. I'm not supporting it at this point. I'm not proposing it. I'm just saying that I think it's coming. We've won, I think we're at 59 games against the so-called P5 that we've won. As you know, 7 out of 9 years we've been on New Year's Day. We made the playoff, which no one thought anybody from our group could do.
All right, here's the bottom line. Are you as happy today with the job as you were on August 14th, 2012?
I am in one key sense, and that is I'm really proud of what we've accomplished. I think this league, Sports Illustrated at one point a while back said we were one of the best stories of the last decade, as a conference, and especially in football. And I think all credit goes to our schools and to the investments they've made and to the intelligent decisions they've made and to our student athletes who, against all obstacles, have fought hard. We've won. I think we're at 59 games against the so-called P5 that we've won. As you know, 7 out of 9 years we've been on New Year's Day. We made the playoff, which no one thought anybody from our group could do. We've had to deal with branding. And, it's funny, working in television all those years, Rick, you think I'd be pretty aware of how important branding is. But I really understood how important it is with this whole P5, G5 and how that can affect everything. It affects the amount of attention you get. That's why I've been so forward and so vocal, because I just felt that I didn't want my student athletes feeling like they were second-class citizens. I thought we were nationally relevant, but I also thought that we're not going to get the kind of coverage unless I'm out there. And to be honest with you, when I was criticizing the committee, I really did think it was essentially a P5 invitational, in the college football playoff. I really did. And that's been my job to some degree, to go out there and go on. I did a serious radio show for 2 years, literally pretty much every week or every other week. Finally, I was the one who said, I just can't keep doing this. At some point, it's just too much time and effort. And also, you can only talk about so much. They were very kind. They let me talk about the conference week after week. As a conference like ours, you're not going to get the attention that you've earned.